Hi everyone, it's Jennifer from Fiberflux. In this video, I'm going to show you how to crochet the All About Fun hat. As you can see, this hat is thick, it's chunky, it's a quick project, and the colors are so super cute and fun, and that's why I call it the All About Fun hat, because it's got this really whimsical, fluffy pom-pom. It has ribs and stripes, and it's just a really fun, colorful hat for a chilly gray winter day. So let's get started. For this project, you're going to need a 9mm end crochet hook, a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle for weaving in your ends and attaching a pom-pom if you choose to use a pom-pom, and some buttons if you like also. Now these are optional. I have here a letter button, which is fun to maybe incorporate a child's initials or even their name or a fun word on there. However, you can use any button you like or none at all. There's tons of really cute buttons at the craft store to pick from. The yarn I'll be using is called Red Heart Mixology. However, you can use any super bulky yarn you like. Just look for on the yarn label super bulky 6. Our hat will be made as a rectangle, and then we're going to fold the rectangle and seam it, and then we're going to weave some yarn in the top and pull it tight to create that cinch at the top of the hat. So what we're going to do is start off with our rectangle. So we're going to put a slip knot on our hook. So wrap the yarn around your fingers to make a loop. Bring the yarn behind the loop, reach in with your hook, bring up the loop and tighten. At this point, you'll want to measure the height of the head. Now I'm going to be using my trusty foam head and get the measurements from my foam head. But you want to measure how tall you'd like your hat to be. Mine is going to be 20 chains tall, and that will give me enough room to give me enough height for my hat, and then a little at the top to create that cinch, okay? But you'll want to measure the child's head or the adult, whatever you're, whoever you're making the hat for. Mine is going to be 20 inches, and that'll be the height, and then when we work rows, that'll be the circumference. So if you want the circumference to be bigger or smaller, you'll simply work more or less rows. Okay, so I'm going to do a chain 20 to begin. To make a chain, wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the loop. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So this is my starting chain, and you can double check yourself. I'm going to use my foam head here, but you can double, this is the back of the head, by placing it, and just make sure you have a little bit at the top there, okay? Next, we're going to chain 3. To begin row 1 of our hat, we're going to count the 3rd chain from the hook. This loop here does not count. So count 1, 2, and 3. So in this chain here, we're going to work a double crochet. So wrap yarn around hook, insert the hook into the chain, and bring up a loop. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the last 2 loops on your hook. That's the double crochet. Next, we're going to work double crochets in each one of these chains all the way across until we get to the end. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll rejoin towards the end of this row. Okay, I'm just working double crochets in this last couple of chains of our row. And then in this very last chain, just work a double crochet in that chain as well. Okay, so row 1 is complete. We have a nice colorful strip here. It's very squishy and warm. So let's move on to row 2. I'm going to do 2 rows of each color. You can do any striping sequence you like. So I'm going to continue with this yarn for this next row, and then the row after that I'll show you how to switch colors. So what we're going to do to move on to the next row is to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Now because our hat, this is going to be actually the bottom edge of our hat, and this will be the side, so this part will wrap around the head. I want to create a little bit of a ridge or a rib to make it kind of look like a ribbed hat. So what I'm going to do is we chained 3 and I'm going to turn my work. Now I'm going to work double crochets into the back loop only of this row. So if we turn our work and look at the top, you can see all these V's, okay? We're going to just work into this back part of this V. So if you look at this V here, now this chain 3 counts as a double crochet, so we're not going to be working into that stitch. So this pink one here, insert the hook into that back loop only and work your double crochet. And that is going to create this little ridge, this little decorative ridge, because we're not working that front loop. We're not incorporating that front loop into our stitch. We're leaving it unworked. So it's going to create this nice little textured element of our hat. Okay, so I'm just working double crochets in the back loops only all the way across. So I'm going to continue working my back loops only, and we'll rejoin towards the end of this row. As you can see already, we have a nice little ridge there. It gives a nice texture. So I'm just coming up to the end of row 2, just working those double crochets in the back loops only, and then we'll finish it off by putting a double crochet into that turning chain, just the top chain of that turning chain from the previous row. Okay, so then we're going to move on to row 3. I'm going to switch colors. Now you can do one color per row. You can do two rows of the same color before switching. It's totally up to you, whatever you want to do. And this is a great stash busting project as well, because you could even do one row of each type of yarn leftovers that you have. I'm going to switch to this solid pink to kind of mix things up a bit with the whole mixology yarn theme here. So just insert your hook into that last stitch worked, and then bring the new yarn through, and then just tie it on. Now you can weave the ends in as you go along, or you can weave them in at the end. It's totally up to you. Okay, so once we've tied that new yarn on, and as a side note, there's lots of ways to join yarn. I just like to tie it right on. If you have a preferred method, definitely feel free to do that at this point. So insert the hook into that same stitch there where you tied the yarn on, bring up a loop, and chain 3. 1, 2, 3. So for row 3, I'm just going to tighten that up just so, there we go, just a little bit. So for row 3, we're going to continue with this ribbing. So for the previous row, we worked into the back loops, but if we work into the back loops on this side, because we flipped the work over, it's going to put the rib on this side, on the inside of the hat. We want to keep the ribs on the outside of the hat because it's our decorative element that we're using. So for this row, we're going to do the front loops only. So we're going to work a double crochet into the front loops only of each stitch. And to do that, we're just going to wrap yarn around hook and then come up under. So see, we had the V's on the top, like when we did the back loops. We're going to be working into this front loop this time and leave this back loop unworked. So on this side, it'll look like this side. Okay, so wrap yarn around hook, come up under that front loop, and insert your hook right into that front loop. Now bring up a loop. Whoops, I went right through my yarn. Let's try that again. Wrap yarn around hook. I went through the middle of it. Now come up through that front loop. There we go. Bring up a loop. Wrap yarn around hook. Bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook. Bring it through the last 2 loops on your hook. Now if we flip it over to the other side, you can see that loop is unworked and we have a little ridge going already, or rib, whatever you're going to call it. Okay, so we're just going to work our double crochets into the front loops only of this row. So I'm going to continue with my row, just working double crochet in these front loops. And towards the end of this row, we'll rejoin and finish off row 3. Okay, so let me just show you one more time. If we flip it over so you can see it keeps that same look. Okay, so I'm just coming up to that very last stitch of the row. So we worked in the front loops only, and then I worked a double crochet into that turning chain. Okay, to continue with your hat, we're going to chain 3 and turn again, and then we're going to repeat rows 2 and 3 this row here and this row here, rows 2 and 3, over and over and over again until our hat is wide enough, or tall enough actually, to go around the head. So the number of rows you work will be the circumference of the hat. So if we go back to our little foam head here, we lay it here, you can see we need to keep going all the way around the head. So I'm just going to keep working some more rows until the circumference is as large as we need it to be. Okay? So I went ahead and finished my rectangle. Now the length that I got was about 18 inches long from the beginning edge to the finish, and that is the circumference that I needed for my particular head measurements. So I worked rows 2 and 3 until I got the length that I needed. So just work 2 and 3 until you get the length that you need as well. Now we created these pretty ribs, so we're going to want them on the outside. We're going to be seaming to make a tube. And one last thing I wanted to mention, if you notice, I began with a variegated stripe, and I did pink, variegated, and I ended on a pink stripe. So just make sure if you're doing multicolors like I'm doing, when you bring it together, it will look more seamless and continue along with the pattern. If you had it like this, you'd have a big thick stripe of one color. So just start and end on a different color so it continues with your striping sequence. So we made these ribs by working into the front and back loops on the different rows. So we want those to show. So we're going to be seaming. So bring the edges together. We're going to make these ribs on the inside right now because we're going to seam. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we want to sandwich them together, and I'm going to be working just a slip stitch seam right across. It's super easy and fast. So either yarn will work, and just insert your hook into the first layer of your sandwich. And I want to have a rib on my seam as well. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to, but I wanted to keep this same ribbing throughout the whole hat and make it look very blended. So for this next layer of my sandwich, I'm only going to go into the back loop, and that's going to keep this front loop unworked and give us an additional rib along our seam to match the rest of our hat. So just bring your new yarn through both layers and just tie it right on. And we can weave this in either as we go along or later. It's up to you. So reach back in where you tied it. There we go. Bring up a loop, chain 1, and then we're going to turn because we want to work from right to left, okay? So this tail we can incorporate now or later. I'm just going to kind of get it out of the way for now so you can really see what I'm doing here. So because we turn, now this loop that we want to work with is in the back. So just work into the front loop here because we turned. So go ahead and go in the front loop, and then in this other layer go into both loops because we're just going to let one loop show because we don't want the rib to be too thick. We want it to look like the other ribs that we've done. Okay, so reach in, bring up a loop. Now bring that loop through the loop already on your hook. Okay, go into that front loop. Go into both loops on the other layer. Bring it through, bring that loop through the loop already on your hook. Go into that front loop. Go into both loops on the other side and work your slip stitch. We're just going to do this all the way across, making sure that we're just working into that one loop. Okay, now what I like to do when I'm seaming is to just stop for a moment after I've done a few stitches and turn it right side out. You don't have to do it all the way, just a little bit, and just to see how your work is going. See, you can see that rib, and our seam is pretty invisible, and it kind of matches these other ribs that we have going on. Okay, so let's just continue all the way across with our seam. Again, we're going into the front loop and then into both loops of the other layer. We're just going to do this all the way across until we get to the end. Go into the front loop, go into both loops, all the way across. Front loop, both loops. And you also want to make sure that your edges are matching up. You don't want to have too many stitches when you get to the end of one layer and not enough of the other layer. So I'm going to keep working my slip stitch seam all the way across, and we're going to rejoin at the end, and I'm going to show you how to finish off the hat and to also cinch the top. Okay, so I'm just working into that very last little stitch and just slip stitch it, okay? When we're done, we can cut our yarn and just go ahead and fasten off. Okay, at this point, let's turn it right side out so we can see our handiwork. So right now we have a tube, a nice looking ribbed tube. This is going to make a great hat, very cozy. Okay, and if we look at our seam, kind of straighten it out a little bit, you can see that the ribs just continue and it looks very nice. So go ahead and just take your tapestry needle and weave in those ends. Now keep the pink ends into the pink section and vice versa because we want everything to blend. So we're just going to weave that in. Trim, got another end popping out, there we go, and the same thing on the other side. Now the next thing we're going to do is our hat, because we worked it, we have vertical stripes. I want to kind of give a nice finished edge to the bottom of our hat. Sometimes when you work vertically like this, the bottom edge, it doesn't necessarily look rough, but we want to put a nice edge here because we've tied new colors on and it can look a little lumpy. So what we want to do is we're going to just put a thin edging of single crochet in our solid color just along the bottom, just to kind of bring it all together and neaten up the bottom a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is determine where you'd like to start. I'm going to start near my seam, and we actually did such a good job seaming that it was actually hard to find that seam. So just tie your yarn into one of these bottom stitches or spaces because we're actually working into the sides. This is going to be the bottom of the hat, but we're working into the side. So at some time you'll need to work into the stitches, and some of these you'll need to work into the spaces. So we're going to just neaten this up a little bit and give ourselves a nice finished edge to our work. Okay, so I just tied the yarn right into one of these spaces. Reach in with your hook, bring up a loop and chain one. Next, just go in each one of these. I'm going to weave my end in as I go along. Just work a single crochet in each one of these stitches or spaces, whatever you come to. Just make sure you get them nice and evenly spaced because we're giving us a nice finished edge. Okay, if you've never worked a single crochet, just insert your hook, wrap yarn around hook, bring up the loop, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through both loops. Okay, so we're just going to do this all the way around our hat. Now we got our end here, so I'm going to just pause for a moment and just trim that so it just kind of gets hidden and we can forget about it. Okay, so we're just working single crochets in each stitch or space that we come to. We're going to have both that we're working with here. Okay, so I'm going to go around the circumference of this hat and give it a nice edge on the bottom. And then once we get around to where we began, we'll rejoin and finish it up. Okay, so I'm just finishing up our little single crochet edging here for our hat. I'm just going to join with a slip stitch to close the round. Okay, so now we can cut our yarn and fasten off, and we'll want to weave that in and end in as well. So go ahead and fasten that off, and then we can turn our hat and weave that end in. You can save all these tails for the end of your project, but I like to weave mine in as I go along because it saves, I feel like it saves me some time at the end. Okay, and I think a lot of ends all at once is can be overwhelming. So anyway, we have a nice, clean, straight edge on the bottom of our hat now, but we still need to create the crown and cinch it up. So that's super easy. What we're going to do is turn our hat inside out again, and the edge that we just put our edging onto is going to stay down here at the bottom. Now all we're going to do is basically just whip stitch the top and pull it tight to close it up, okay? We're also going to be putting a big fun pom-pom on top of this, so it's going to cinch nicely, but the pom-pom will sit on top to kind of hide any of the mechanics. Okay, so all we're going to do is just sandwich this together, similarly to how we seamed the other side. Just sandwich it together, and then just quickly, I cut a piece of yarn that was, let's see, about 24 inches. You probably won't need all this, but so just go ahead, and I'm just whip stitching with my tapestry needle and a piece of matching yarn. And the stitches don't need to be super close together. In fact, if they're a little bit apart, like you can see one here and one here, if they're a little bit apart, it's going to be much easier to pull the top of this hat closed. Okay, so I'm just working a very quick, kind of loose whip stitch into the top. You don't want them to be so far apart that it's going to let cold air into the top of the hat, but you don't want it to be so super tight that you can't cinch this thing up either. Okay, so I just did a really quick whip stitch. Okay, so I left a tail here, about 10 inches or so, I don't know. And then we're going to pull this tapestry out on this side. So we have two ends. Now we're just going to pull it and pull it on both sides. And you might have to kind of work with it a little bit. Okay, so we're just cinching it up. Okay, then what we're going to do is take these two ends and tie them really, really tightly. Okay, we pulled it together as much as we possibly could until there isn't any more space to pull it any tighter. Then we're just going to tie the top of this very, very tightly. You want to put a couple knots in this. You definitely do not want this to come apart. And if it does, we're crafty people. We can just put it back together. But, you know, with hats, especially kids' hats, they get a lot of wear and tear. So now you can take these ends and just trim them. This will be on the inside of the hat, or if you like, you can just weave them in. It's up to you. Now let's turn our hat right side out and look at our handiwork here. So our hat, it's hard to believe that this was a rectangle at one time, but our hat has a nice crown on it now. So let's put our super fun pom-pom on top. Now I have, I think, just enough of the variegated yarn. I used, this was a full ball, and this is what's left over from making the hat. So I like to make pom-poms without any fancy tools, and I just use my hand. So what you're going to do is cut about 12 inches, a piece of yarn about 12 inches long, and then you're going to take the yarn and let it hang down the front of your hand and just wind it. I'm going to wind it about 50 to 75 times. So I'm going to go ahead and wind my yarn. We're going to make a very large fluffy pom-pom because this is a really bulky, thick hat. We don't want a little teeny tiny pom-pom at the top. We want something big and fun, okay? So I'm going to wrap this about 75 times, 50 to 75 times, and see how thick it's going to be. So we'll rejoin in just a moment. So once you wound the yarn around your hand, now I got 66 wraps around my hand and then I ran out of yarn. So it actually worked out perfectly that I used up all of my yarn. I had no leftovers, okay, of this variegated. Now, as you can see, this is what I had left over of the pink. So I could definitely make another hat, and then the yarn I showed at the beginning of the video, the Mixology Swirl, I could incorporate both of these colors for the next hat. So anyway, take your little bundle and I carefully slipped my hand out, and then you can just very carefully set it aside. Don't let it come apart. Then we're going to take this strand, this 12-inch piece of yarn that we cut a few minutes ago, and we're going to lay this little bundle right on top, just like that. Then we're going to take our strand and go ahead and tie it as tight as possible around your bundle. Just get a nice, tight, secure knot around that bundle. Just like that, okay? Now you're going to hold these two strings we're going to use to attach the pom-pom onto our hat. So now we have a bunch of loops. So all we're going to do is cut all of these loops. So cut until there's no more loops left. And be careful not to cut your two little strings because we're going to need those and they'll be too short if we cut them. So go ahead and just cut all of these loops. Now, there are a lot of pom-pom making tools. If you like to use pom-pom making tools better than doing it with your hand, definitely do what you feel comfortable doing. I like to do this because it's quick and easy. Okay, there are a lot of long, wild strands though when you make this, when you make a pom-pom with your hand, so you do need to give it a little bit of a haircut. As you can see, it looks pretty crazy right now. So just look for any loops that are left. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is just kind of squeeze your pom-pom and get all these ends lined up. And then we're just gonna give it a little bit of a haircut. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim my pom-pom and we'll rejoin once this pom-pom, I've gotten it under control, okay? Okay, so I gave the pom-pom a haircut. It's looking really cool because of the variegated yarn. It's very colorful and it totally matches our fun hat. So what we're gonna do is just, now this hat is thick enough where we can just kind of pop our finger through. We don't need to use a tapestry needle to get it in there. And then just, you can kind of just bring your finger through like that and just kind of tuck it in there and pull it through. Okay, so just make sure it's centered because a pom-pom that's not centered will look funny when it's on your head. Okay, and then we're just going to come into the inside of the hat and just tie it very tightly onto the hat. You want that to get on there really, really securely. Now you can weave in the ends or just trim. It's up to you. I'm not as picky if it's the inside of the hat because you won't really see that. Okay, and then if you have any loose little pom-pom strands sticking out, you can try to trim those also. Okay, so our hat is complete and you can double check it onto your head or your styrofoam. Just kind of slip it on there and see how it looks, and it looks really, really cool. I can't really fit the whole thing in my camera, but it looks really cute on this head. So that is how you crochet the All About Fun hat. I hope you enjoyed this project, and be sure and click on the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux video updates. Thanks again.